Now, our very next speaker comes all the way from across the pond. If you go towards the left side of the map, I think, to the United States of America, our next speaker is called Tessera Crosby. She was born in the US, but now lives in a beautiful town in the Netherlands, or city in the Netherlands, called Zwolle. Am I right? Anyone from Zwolle here? Anyone? No? Oh, nice. Great to see you. So Tessera lives now in Zwolle, but growing up, she went through so many challenges, so many different traumatic challenges that I think if any of us were to go through that today, I think we'll find a hard time in overcoming them. She was married at a young age. She was married for 14 years with her first husband until the unfortunate demise of her first husband. And during that whole time of that period, she noticed that there was a stigma towards talking about grief when it comes to the workplace or those kind of environments. But fast forward, she's now remarried. She has 2 amazing kids. And now she's giving HR managers, she's giving companies, she's giving organizations practical tips, workshops, trainings on how to integrate grief and how to integrate grief conversations in the workplace. So it's not so much of a stigma anymore. Without further ado, can we please give a big round of applause for Tessera Crosby.
6 weeks after I buried my husband, I woke up alone in bed. And for a while, I couldn't figure out why I was alone, why he wasn't next to me. I did know that I felt completely dysregulated and disoriented, and everything seemed to hurt. My whole body seemed to hurt, every single cell. It felt like the skin had been peeled off of my body. Not only my body hurt, my brain inside my head hurt as well. That, and the fact that I couldn't even remember for a while that he had passed, made me think that I was going crazy. I now know this is what grief does. Grief isn't just something in your heart. It affects your whole body. It affects your nervous system, so your heart rate goes up, your digestion and your immune system go down. And grief now has been proven to affect multiple regions of the brain, including those responsible for memory, focus, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Thus, grief is physical, cognitive, emotional, and all-consuming. Before my husband died, for the first time in my life, I was actually doing pretty well. I had overcome some of the battles and the issues of my youth. And I was in a job that combined working and studying, high-paced, demanding, and full-on. And I loved it. My grades were high, I was thriving, and I was learning a lot. I was having fun at work. For the first time in my life, I finally had a bit of confidence. Then came his cancer, his pain, and the roller coaster that cancer patients and their families go through. It had a lot of impact. Even before his death, there were parts of him that I was losing, and there were things I was losing. I now know that is called secondary griefs. The invisible losses, or invisible griefs. The equality in our relationship was off. The balance shifted. The way we always used to do things wasn't possible anymore. And I couldn't lean on my husband because he was fighting to stay alive. So how could I burden him with things, trivial things, like having a bad day at work? But secondary losses can also be, and this is something I had also experienced years before even, I had gotten bad news, and I was in no state to drive home, but I went in my car anyway, and I drove home and I crashed my car. The secondary loss can be the loss of a car. The secondary loss can also be the loss of finances because of more medical bills to pay, and the loss of a job. And a secondary loss can also be the loss of mental clarity because of the roller coaster that you are in the moment. And somewhere along that time, my work did start to slip a bit. My focus fractured, my memory was a bit blurred. So my supervisor pulled me aside. And even though she knew I had spent the last few nights at the ER with my husband, 'cause who knows here that you could spend a whole night at the ER? I spent the whole nights at the ER instead of sleeping, and she knew about my home situation. She said, "This isn't about your home life. You just can't handle this. You are not cut out for this job." And I didn't have the vocabulary to defend myself. So I simply believed her for years. And every bit of confidence that I had finally gained was gone again. It took me years to realize that it wasn't me, that it was grief, that it was stress, that it was neurological overload. Because here's the thing I wish someone would have told me back then, that grief rewires your brain. Literally. Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, who is a grief researcher, has now proven that the brain's default relationship maps stored in the posterior cingulate cortex are shattered by loss. And that the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making, focus, and logic thinking, shows a decreased activity on brain scans of actively grieving people. This is why grieving people feel foggy, forgetful, and disoriented. It is not weakness, it is their brain trying to adapt and trying to learn, having to learn something devastating, having to learn how to live in a world that doesn't make any sense anymore, how to live in a world that has changed, and how to live in a world that has a different future than they had imagined or had been working towards. And after my husband died, I was completely alone. Being a woman alone in this world, I did not feel safe. So I signed up for a combat sport. And something unexpected happened to me. In that gym, gloves on, body moving, punching, sweating, running, sparring, it gave my grief an outlet. It gave my fear a rhythm. But most importantly, it gave my brain relief. Because when I was running, sparring, punching, I couldn't spiral into thought loops the way is often so common with grieving people. And my brain simply didn't have the bandwidth to ruminate when I was running. And in that stillness of motion, my brain began to restructure itself. The movements became my medicine. And in the end, my body saved my mind. Research has now proven that movement is the most powerful and the most effective thing you can do while your brain is undergoing changes. It facilitates learning, which means the brain can rewire itself and can adapt to a world that has changed. And I myself returned to work very quickly after his death. People thought I was doing well. They thought I was coping well because I was at work again. They said, "Oh, you are doing so well. You are already full-time at work again." But I had what psychologists call an instrumental grief. Instrumental grief style is a grief style that holds on to structure by holding on to daily routines, and a grief style that is also marked by overthinking and taking action. These are the people that might organize a marathon for their loved ones. These are the people who just seem to keep going. And these are the people who we call in our society strong. But that appearance might shift, and 3 to 6 months later, after their loss, they might develop burnout-like symptoms. And they may need some time off of work then. In contrast, people with an intuitive grief style, this is the grief style that is more outwardly expressed. They cry a lot more, they cry more openly, they talk more about their grief, and they seem less together. They may need more time off of work in the beginning, but when they do return back to work, they are able to build it up steadily, and there's less chance of a fallback then. Now, what if workplaces knew the difference between intuitive grief style and instrumental grief style? They could better anticipate what kinds of support are needed and when. Maybe not just immediately after loss, but maybe more importantly, in the months that follow. And they could understand why one employee might want to go back to work a week after the death of their child, and another might need almost half a year of sick leave before they can return. And the fact that they have to take sick leave and that there isn't a dedicated grief leave is already very sad, but that is a topic not for now. As I mentioned, I had more of an instrumental grief style. A grief style that is also marked by taking action. That doesn't work out very well always. In my case, I wanted to take action, give meaning to his suffering by publishing my husband's unfinished book. So I hired a ghostwriter. And it cost me 15,000 euros, and I still don't have the book. You see, grief makes you vulnerable, not just mentally, but also, and not just emotionally, but also financially. And I wish someone would have told me back then, don't make big decisions right now, because my brain was not ready yet. In the same matter, workplaces would be wise not to hand over large financial responsibilities to people who are actively grieving. And because I find work so important, and I wish that grief would not be so much of a taboo in the workplace, I would like to offer a few other ways how workplaces can help. I've already mentioned the two grieving styles, instrumental grief and intuitive grief, and if this would be more known, that it would help manage expectations, create more custom care, and in some cases prepare for a potential fallback. I've also mentioned not to expect high-stake decision-makings too soon. Give focused but low-risk tasks instead, and give the brain time to stabilize before you can trust it with major negotiations or financial responsibilities. Another thing that would really benefit grieving employees if there would be more flexible structures. Because during the active grieving period, and often a long time afterwards, some days are bearable and others just aren't. And grief disrupts sleep and energy. So if it would be possible in a job to have flexible working hours, or maybe later working hours, that would really benefit a grieving employee. And we could train managers, leaders, and supervisors to see the difference between disengagement and disorientation. Because grief doesn't always look the way we think it looks. It doesn't always look like crying, but it might look like zoning out during a meeting, or irritability, or memory loss and missed deadlines. When we take all these things into account, a grieving employee might return to work a bit more earlier or more consistently. This would benefit them simply for the fact that they would be among other people more. And grieving people do not grieve well alone. We are humans. We are sociable creatures. We are not made to grieve alone. So why not assign grief peer mentors in the workplace or facilitate walk and talks? That way, movement is naturally included as well. It would be really great if workplaces could encourage as much movement as possible in the workplace. Maybe by having a yoga room or boxing gloves in a break room. This way, the grieving employee, but people in general, will have a way to shift their focus and to let their minds exhale. And above all, to give words to a grieving person. Even if you don't know what to say, you could say, "I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you." Or, "There is no wrong way to grieve." Or, "You still belong here. What do you need today?" Because psychological safety begins with giving words. And words like that are oxygen to a grieving person. Words like that don't just offer comfort, it offers safety, and it offers a sense of dignity. It acknowledges to the person that they are not broken, but that they are human, a human that is adapting and learning. And when you meet that learning with care, flexibility, and dignity, you don't just get your employee back maybe a bit more sooner or more consistently, but you get a more resilient employee back. More resilient employees build more resilient teams, maybe more connected, maybe more loyal, but most importantly, more resilient. Because you didn't just see their grief, you honored it.